Okay guys, before we begin, I want you to make sure that you have your how to glaze your pinch pot notes out in front of you. Remember, I've left spaces so that you can take additional notes. My expectation is that you are using these notes while you are glazing, so that if you have any questions that can be found from your notes, you can be a self-starter and answer those questions. All right, the first thing I want you to do is write down tools I need. You will need your cone 06 glazes. You will need glaze brushes. You will need a small sponge. You will need a large sponge. And you will need masking tape. Okay, so the first thing you are going to want to do is taking a small damp sponge and just wipe over your pots. Why do you think we need to wipe our pots off? Yeah, because there's still dust on them or oil from your hands. So you want to just make sure that you wipe them off. And something I suggest that you do is if you just take a pencil and just mark where you don't want to glaze. Because the pencil is going to burn off in the kiln, but it just gives you a guide as to where you don't want to glaze. Now, it's easy with a foot. You will not be glazing this foot because if any glaze runs down, if it gets too hot and melts down, you still have room where it won't stick to the kiln shelf. If your pot does not have a foot, I recommend just marking a line kind of a 1/4 of an inch up from the bottom with that pencil all the way around. Again, this pencil will burn off in the kiln. And if it helps you, you could even just kind of crisscross the bottom to remind you not to add any glaze there. Once your pot is dry, you are going to add masking tape as a guideline. So I like to just use this to mark off kind of that 50% area. And I really like to push the tape down so that I know that there are no gaps. So I recommend that you start glazing with your white glaze first because it will dry and then you can add your line networks to the white. But for the video demo's sake, I'm going to use my color first as it's darker so it will show up. So you always want to make sure that you have cone 06 glazes. I will typically always write on the top and on the sides that it's cone 06, showing that it's low fire. But you also need to get in the habit of looking on the sides on the label to make sure it is cone 06. Sometimes people put wrong lids back on wrong glazes, so just make sure you double check. Make sure that you have your analogous colors, and you're also going to need black and white. And when you're ready to start using the glaze, the first thing you need to do is just make sure that the lid is secured on top. And then you're going to shake it up. You always want to shake it because the glaze tends to get separated, and we just want to make sure that as we paint, we have the right consistency. So you're going to select a glaze brush. You'll know it's a glaze brush because it has spray paint on the side. And I recommend using the wider brushes for the wider areas. These wider brushes are great because they can cover a large surface area. And I just want to point out, it's really important that you select a glaze brush because they're just better quality. Do you see how these bristles are more compact, that it kind of keeps a clean, straight line even as I bend the bristles? If you use a glaze brush, you'll have success. If you use a slip brush, do you notice how bad these bristles are? It's hard to get control and things tend to look sloppy. So do not use a slip brush. Okay, the other thing I always want you to get in the habit of, even though this brush looks clean, wash it. You don't know if somebody has used this for glaze and not washed it properly. And the last thing we want to do is contaminate these glazes. If I dipped my purple straight into the blue, I can't guarantee I'm actually going to get blue-purple. I've now changed the chemical compound, so I don't actually know what color I'm necessarily going to get. So you never ever want to contaminate your glazes. So now I've washed my brush. I like to just kind of wipe off the excess water. I'm just going to paint the side of my pot. And you want to paint in different directions. So for this first coat, I'm going to paint in one direction, kind of let it dry a little. Now, in between coats, you often have to let your glaze dry. So what could I be doing while I wait for this glaze to dry? Yeah, you could be working on your next pots. Now I want to point something out here. Even though I have this little line to remind me where not to glaze, I want to point out if you have a brush, a good glaze brush, and you have it loaded with glaze, you can actually what I call trim, where you take the edge of the brush and you can create a very clean, straight painted line. And you want to do that. It just makes sure things look nice and neat, and your craftsmanship level will be much higher. So I have glazed one coat on this guy. I'm going to come back through and do 3 more coats minimum. I recommend doing 5, but you want to do a minimum of 3 coats. And this time, rather than painting in this direction, I'm going to go the opposite direction. So if you started vertically, you're then going to paint horizontally. If you started horizontally, you then paint vertically, and so on. Why do you think I change directions when I paint the glaze? Yes, to get it all covered, to make sure you hit every area. When you're painting with white, it can sometimes be hard to see if you actually painted the area. Really make sure you get that lip rim as well. A lot of students will often forget that. Okay, so now I've got all of my coats on there. I don't want to remove the tape until it's dry. So you could either work on your other bowls, or you can just use a hairdryer to speed up the process. Okay, so now that it's dry, I can just carefully remove this tape, and I have a nice clean line where I had the tape. Now if you have any little areas like this where the glaze maybe got under the tape, you can just use your fingernail and scratch them off, or you can get one of the nice glaze brushes. You want it to be fairly wet, and you just use it like a little scrubber going side to side. You just scrub off the excess. So now I'm ready to add the white. I can add tape back over the purple glaze. You want to make sure that you really do have all your pot covered. So I even suggest leaving just a little bit of that purple showing, so then you can get an overlap. Because what you don't want to have happen is to have this stripe of raw clay down the middle, because then it won't be food safe. So once again with the white, I want to make sure the lid is on. I'm going to shake it up. I've got my brush. Can I use my purple brush? Could I just dip my purple brush right in there? No, why not? Because it will contaminate it, right? So either clean off your brush or get a new brush. And I'm just going to start painting my white glaze. I often have students say, Miss Mallory, this glaze looks blue, not white. That's okay. It comes out white after it's fired. Remember, glazes can change color slightly. That's okay. It's the chemical compound that we're interested in. But I highly recommend that you always check these little test tiles, because that's the color it's going to come out after it's fired. So does it matter that it looks slightly blue? No, it doesn't. Once I've got all my coats painted on there, remember a minimum of 3, but I recommend up to 5, sometimes even 7 if it's a lighter color. Once I've got all my coats on there, I need it to dry before I can take off the tape and add my line networks. So once again, I highly recommend working on another bowl as you're working on this one so they can be drying and you're not wasting time, or you could speed it up with the hairdryer. Okay, now that is pretty much dry, I can carefully take the tape off. And you just want to double check that there's no little areas of clay exposed. See, this raw clay? So I can hand paint this to cover this clay up. And you could actually hand paint, you don't need to use tape. You could hand paint your entire pot if you'd like. The tape just kind of is there to help you out. Okay, so now I have my color and my white done. I need to add my line networks. I highly recommend checking out one of the small glaze brushes. So we've got these guys. This will be a bigger line, of course. You could have a very thin line. Even these tiniest ones give you ultra thin lines. I'm going to use this guy. Again, I need to rinse it off because I can't trust that someone else actually cleaned it. Wipe off the excess water. The lid is on my Cone 06 Black. I'm going to shake it up. And then I recommend actually just using the little lid next to you. And using the lid, I want to get some paint on my brush, but I don't want to overfill it, otherwise you'll tend to get splodging. And I'm just going to create my line networks. And I want to do these little X's. There's kind of a beauty of it being hand done. You know, it's not going to look exactly perfect. It's not going to look like a machine did it. And that's kind of nice because you spent all this time making it by hand. So I really want you to take your time on your line networks. That's why I'm giving you more than just one day. You're just going to go through creating your line networks. I'm going to include my line networks on the outside as well. Once I've gone through and painted all of these, how many more coats do I need to do of these black line networks? A minimum of 3. So I'm going to let these dry. I can work on another bowl. And then I'm going to come back through and repeat these a minimum of 3 times. So I'm going to come back through and go over all of my lines again very carefully. What I want you to do, once you have finished, just in case you happen to get glaze on the bottom, let's say you accidentally got glaze on the bottom, you're going to use a wet, large sponge, and just carefully holding your piece, you're just going to run it across. So I'm holding it parallel. And you're just going to run it across that sponge, and it will remove any glaze that's on the bottom. Once your pots are done, you can bring them up to me to check them off so that they can get fired.